Hey there, Zack Henderson and Tracy Cook here, and we are so excited to share with you this workshop experience that we just had here at TFC Barbell Club here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had a great group of lifters come to train with us today. A good mix of experienced powerlifting competitors, some folks who actually competed yesterday, and some folks who have actually never really laid hands on a barbell. So what you're gonna see in this video is highlights from the workshop that really just show some of the basics that go into powerlifting technique, some of the standards and faults that someone like a USAPL referee actually looks for in competition, and then some of the more nuanced techniques for how to really supercharge the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. This was so much fun, as per usual. We went overtime just a little bit, but we actually wanted to save this introduction for the end so that hopefully you can tell my enthusiasm, my passion, and maybe a little bit of loss in my voice actually comes out, because this was really, I think, one of the most fun times we've had in a workshop.
Yep, I agree. And we had great participants, and I love the fact that we had advanced competitors, as well as having the ability to have some brand new lifters. That was the best part, being able to work with some of them and hopefully share what we love with them, so maybe they can experience it as well.
Yeah, it was so much fun. So sorry you couldn't be here, but hopefully if you're watching here on the internet, it's the next best thing. So if anything from this video catches your eye or helps you, please do drop a comment. If you have any major questions, we're typically available as well. So check the links in the description below. Again, feel free to leave a thumbs up and a comment, and here's wishing you all the best in your training. We'll see you soon. As we know in powerlifting and strength training, range of motion is one thing, but tension and strength through range of motion is quite another. So what we can kind of think about doing here is blending deep ranges of motion with isometric tension. So what Tracy is going to demonstrate is the Iron Lizard, and it may not look like much on first blush, but it is something. So Tracy's going to get into a deep lunge. Her back leg can be resting on the ground, knee down, or it can be propped up and straight. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more of a stretch on that back hip flexor. But specifically what we're targeting is the front hip, or that bent hip with that front bent knee. So from this lunge position, what Tracy's going to do is she's going to start generating external rotation tension by driving her knee out, but her arm is going to be hugging in. So she's literally fighting against herself. And she's thinking about doing those simultaneously, but also one at a time. So she's thinking, push the knee, hug the arm. Push the knee harder, hug the arm harder. So what we're doing here is we're stacking tension and we're ramping up that strength. We don't just go 100% right off the bat. We go 10%, 20, 30, 40, leaving no stone unturned, because by the time she gets to a subjective 50% effort, she's working really hard. And relax. Now, just by looking at her, you don't necessarily know that that's what's going on. But internally, that is what's going on. So that's the push out, or the outie. Now we're going to do the innie. You guys know, like the innie and outie machine? This is like your do-it-yourself version. So now she's going to block the inside of the knee with her arm, or with her elbow, and we're going to do the same thing. Her knee is going to squeeze in against her arm pushes out against her knee. Notice nothing is really moving. Maybe a little bit, but not much. Again, the knee squeezes in, the arm pushes out. We're dialing up the tension, one notch at a time. So we'll squeeze in harder, push out harder. Squeeze in harder, push out harder. Again, we're ramping that up, maybe 4 or 5 times until you're at something around a 60 to 80% perceived effort, and you would hold for between 15 to maybe 30 seconds. That is the Iron Lizard. Tracy, am I missing anything on that one?
No.
That's fun. So let's give it a shot.
Yep. It is.
Good.
And he knows this. This drill is my favorite drill, mobility warm-up. I do it every day before training. I think it's had the most benefit as far as hitting areas that I wouldn't hit with others. And I used to with squats, I would get like this achiness kind of in the sides. And once we added that, I can't say it's because of this drill, but I never have had the issue again. So I kept it.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
So again, in the spirit of experimenting with things in your training, if you have some sort of mobility issue, nagging aches and pains, and you do something and it seems to clear it up,
stay with it.
Keep
if it
doing
feels weird and it doesn't, move on. I rotate through some of mine and some stick, some don't. This has been a keeper for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cool. So any questions on Iron Lizard? Cool. So now you know what the iron part is all about. Okay? So our next drill is going to be the goblet squat or the simple prying bodyweight squat. You guys probably know that Tracy and I are kind of kettlebell nerds. And as far as we're concerned, kettlebells and barbells go together like peanut butter and jelly. We won't be doing a whole heck of a lot of kettlebell stuff today, but we figured that the goblet squat was a absolutely must-hit drill in the back squat progression. So, if you're not familiar, the goblet squat is a front squat wherein a weight is held at the chest. Traditionally done with a kettlebell, could also be performed with a dumbbell, honestly a sandbag, a rock, a jug of milk, a child, a pet, pretty much anything that you can hold like this at chest height with your elbows relatively narrow. So, Tracy's going to demonstrate the goblet squat. So for the purposes of the kettlebells, we're going to hold by the horns, the base of the horns of the bell. Her elbows are in, her shoulders are down, and because we're holding a weight out in front, what do you think is being engaged? Core and upper back. That's exactly it. And those are two very important things that we have to keep engaged with the back squat. From here, Tracy's just going to squat straight down. And because the weight is acting as a counterbalance, you might find that the goblet squat helps your depth without you ever even like really having to think too much about it, because it kind of pulls you down. From here, she's just going to take a breath, squeeze, and stand back up. That's the gist of the basic goblet squat. Now what we're going to do here for bonus is we're going to add just a little bit of hip mobility at the bottom. And there's going to be, we'll say, two main ways that we're going to go about that. So we'll come on down, and the first thing that we're going to do is the prying motion, where we're literally just going to push knees side to side. Just kind of prying open those adductors. And see, she's coming up off the heels. That's totally fine. She's going to square back up. Now, remember in the Iron Lizard when we could squeeze in? Well, now we've got both elbows against both knees. So what she can do here is actually push both knees into both elbows and push both elbows out against both knees. That's tough. Then she's going to square back up, tighten up, and stand up, and relax. So we have the opportunity and the luxury with the goblet squat to be creative at the bottom, because we don't have to worry about a heavy weight on our back. We have a weight right here. That affords us the opportunity to get low. If we ever need to drop the weight, the floor is right there. That's totally fine. But otherwise, we can pry around, we can squeeze, we can push, we can just find comfort in the bottom of our squat. Listen, this does not have to be the bottom of your squat. That does not have to be the bottom of your squat. Bottom of your squat could be right here. It could be right here, it could be here. The principles are kind of the same. It's a long way. We can check so many boxes with the goblet squat or any other just like front-loaded squat. Stance, core engagement, back engagement. So many of those things we can refine with the goblet squat first, relatively light, weight is out here, we've got the counterbalance, before we worry about all of the implications of the back squat. Because honestly, by the time you put heavy weight on your back, your stance, your core bracing, all these other things kind of already need to be in place. The back squat isn't necessarily, I mean, you're gonna learn and practice a lot of these techniques in the back squat itself, but it always helps, especially from a learning and progression capacity, to get the techniques and the idea and the feeling down first before you do something that is like going to be super specific to your competition lift. So that's kind of the spirit behind warm-ups, between progressions, between accessory and variation drills, is so that you can get the skill and then layer it on top of your actual competition lift. Speaking of the competition lift, let's take a look at the back squat itself.
Okay, I'm going to give a preface first as far as some concepts that will be applicable to all three lifts so that I don't have to repeat them over and over again, but that you will keep them in your mind as we go through each of the lifts. So there are three main components that I think are the foundation and the most important of all three lifts, kind of at an overview level. There is the setup, which with the setup, it is probably 80% of the lift. If you set up correctly, that lift, you're setting yourself up for a good lift. If you unrack the bar in any of the lifts and it feels heavy, sometimes I'll re-rack it. If I don't set up correctly and take my time, take your time in your setup. It will make such a difference in your lifts. So I'm going to go through the setup of each of the lifts. And that's something that I want you, when you're working on the lifts, I want you to make sure that you take your time and focus on that. Second is wedging. All three lifts have a wedging component to it. Getting wedged under the bar, whether it's with squat, bench, or deadlift, is also part of building that tension to set you up for a very strong lift. And then stacking. So in all three lifts, we have a stacking component, whether it's stacking your torso, stacking your arm. Having a strong stacked position for all the lifts will also set you up. So I believe that setup, wedging, and stacking are three components that I want you to look for as we go through all of this, because if you master those, you've pretty much mastered the lift, regardless of where you stand, where you grip. Finding those components and making them super strong is what makes a difference. And I practice it constantly. Every training session I do, from warm-up all the way through the main lifts, that's what I'm focusing on. So it'll make a huge difference. So, back squats. Zach's going to demonstrate. I'm going to go through each of the steps. I know that we have competitors and we have beginners. My goal is to go through all of the steps. There's a lot of pieces to it. So don't let it, get too much in your head. I want to go through them all, and then as we come around and work with you, we will kind of hone in on what's specific to you and help break it down. So with the back squat, come around. First, Zach will he will walk up to the bar, take a grip, strong grip. The goal with your grip is to be as close as your mobility will allow. We'll go through that in more detail. Next, Zach will pull himself under the bar, wedge himself under the bar, and he will stand directly under the bar, feet close, so that he's in a nice, strong position. He's wedging himself under the bar. The bar is on his upper traps and rear delt. We'll go into positioning, but right now, this is a nice, strong shelf position. He's squeezing elbows tight, and shoulder blades back and down. Nice, strong upper back. Zach's gonna take a big breath and stand up, straight, nice and strong. You want 3 steps to get back from the rack. 1 to clear the rack, straight back. 1 to set your right foot. 1 to set the left. So now Zach is in a nice, strong, stacked position. Torso, you want your rib cage down, pelvis tucked, so that you are in a very nice, strong brace position. Big breath, and knees and hips are going to break at the same time. In a squat, straight up. Walk forward and rack. What we're looking for with the back squat, the most important concept that you want to be watching for is that this bar stays over your midfoot. So when you're setting yourself up, go ahead and set up. If you have a higher bar position, you're going to be a little more upright. If you have a lower bar position, you're going to be a little bit more hinged back. But you want that bar, if you look at Zach, the bar is right over his midfoot. One thing that you can do to help keep that bar over your midfoot is to, as you come down, so pull yourself down and focus on feeling that you're not coming up on your toes, you're not going back on your heels, you see the bar come back. One thing that can really help a lot to think about is pushing that big toe into the floor. That's something that helps me a lot. And then squeeze that upper back, chest up, stand straight up, and then rack position. So that's the execution, that's the steps. Again, there's a lot of different components to it, but overall, you're trying to get as tight as possible in that upper back, which is why that positioning is very important to keep as close as your mobility allows. Some people have wider grips because that is what's most comfortable and most strong for them. But being close, tight, stacked position, and then pulling yourself down in a very controlled standpoint so that your knees and hips break at the same time. It's better to have the bar a little lower than a little higher. So that way you can get wedged in. If it's higher, this one's a good one, it's a little higher, high for me. I can get under it, but you see, that's not very strong, clearly. So over here, which is about probably the position I would use, when you come under the bar, tight, take your time, find that nice shelf where it feels strong, under it, stand up. So I want you to kind of practice that. When you do that right, then it'll feel super light.
So again, we referenced the Iron Lizard, we found our adductors, we found this idea of squeezing the muscles without changing the joint position. That sounds very simple, but is a very profound idea. Engaging the muscles independently of the joint position. So, one thing that I want us to experiment here with our squat is specifically as we come down, I want you to think about engaging those inner thigh muscles as if you were squeezing an imaginary beach ball between your knees. And then just come up naturally. I don't want you to think about squeezing on your way up, but through most of recent history, a lot of technique, methodology has been focused on knees out, driving knees out, pushing knees out, and I think that's appropriate to a degree, but it's also created imbalances. And even if you're not familiar with those cues, we can still get imbalances if we're not careful and considerate with how we're engaging our muscles through the squat. So, we won't even necessarily worry about weight here, but I just want you to stand up, get in your squat stance, and I want you to think about, before we ever even move, squeeze this imaginary beach ball between your knees. You can also think about pulling the floor together. As if there was a crack down the middle of the floor, you're trying to pull it together. You feel those inner thigh muscles, just a little bit.
Actually, I think doing that helps me figure out where my feet need to be positioned.
Probably. Now, as we come down into our squat, keep that squeeze as far down as you're comfortable with. Keep that squeeze. And now squeeze your rear end and stand on up. Let's do that 2 or 3 more times at your own pace. I still want your knees tracking your toes. Just think about squeezing the imaginary beach ball between the knees. And remember, just like in the Iron Lizard, in the deep stretch, the knee was kind of out, but the intention was driving the knee in. But it didn't actually change the movement. Does that make sense? I don't want you to collapse your knees. I want you to keep your knees from collapsing even though you're trying to pull them in. See what I mean? So, pretty simple, but can be a very profound cue for a lot of us. And again, it's in the interest of stabilizing the hip, stabilizing the knee, engaging through that midline of the body, turning on muscles that are often dormant, in the interest of building stability through the deepest range of motion of our squat. Tracy, am I missing anything on that particular cue?
No.
All right. So does that make sense? Squeezing the imaginary beach ball on the way down. I should probably come up with an easier way to convey all that, but it's just a squeeze on the way down. Cool?
Cool.
I don't want you to think about it on the way up. Don't worry about it. Probably has its best application specifically on the way down. Cool? Speaking of on the way down, a big part of strength training is not letting gravity take over. Duh, it's the whole point of lifting weights. But even when we're going through our eccentrics or our negatives, where we're supposedly yielding to gravity or relaxing through a range of motion, if you want to be as strong as you possibly can, you want to actually take advantage of the negative to build more strength. So we want our negatives, or in the case of the squat, the coming down, we want that to be active. We don't want to fall into our squat and suddenly have to get tight and push our way up. Not good. You won't get strong that way. So, building off of this idea of squeezing the knees in on the way down, we're also going to use our hip flexors to flex the hips. Imagine that. To create an active negative with the squat. So, I'm going to demonstrate this idea not standing vertically, but rather lying horizontally. And Tracy is going to replace the gravitational pull. You'll see what I mean. Hopefully I don't break my battery pack here. Okay, so imagine that I'm standing on the floor. Tracy is gravity. Someone just turned up the gravity. What I'm going to do is not yield to gravity, but rather pull myself down into the squat. So I'm going to drive my knees up to my chest, and it's going to look just like a squat, only in this plane. Tracy's going to add a little bit of resistance as I pull against her. See how I'm shaking? Maybe your squat is here, but my squat is here. She's going to offer a little resistance as I come back out. One more time. Now I'm going to squat a little bit more narrow. Keeping my back flat. I should probably relax my head. Let me do that. Abs, hip flexors, tight. And then same thing, offering a little resistance as I come out. Oh. Does that make sense? You see how it's still a squat, It's on a different plane, but the negative or the, see how we just turned a passive falling into an active pulling? So when you're thinking about your squat, think about actively flexing the hip flexors. In the same way that you would do a bicep curl, you're actively flexing your biceps. It's a little bit tricky, I understand, but try to think about actively using your core, your hip flexors, to pull yourself down or your knees into your chest, or however it makes sense for you. If you layer on top these two ideas, getting out of breath here, squeezing, engaging the adductors, pulling, engaging the low abs and hip flexors, that is the perfect complement to everything that we were doing up here with the setup. If you're tight on your setup, you're locked in, and you practice these cues for the negative, the squat up is almost going to take care of itself. It's almost like you've done all the hard work before the actual squat up. The harder it is at the setup, the harder it is through the negative, to a degree, the easier the actual squat or the actual press or the actual deadlift is going to be. Everybody puts the cart before the horse. We're thinking about squatting up. We're thinking about pushing the barbell up in the bench. We're thinking about lifting the deadlift. Certainly. Certainly. But there's many, many, many steps that come before the actual lift that will set your lift up to be its strongest, safest, most stable. Tracy, am I missing anything on the active negative? So, if you so choose, you can get with your partners and practice that active negative idea. Partner on the grounds. Just think about driving your knees into your chest. Partner up top, you're hooking your hands. You can either hook your hands over the shoelaces, or you can also cup the heels. That's another way you can do it. You can also drive your heels down into your partner's hand. That's another variation to do it. Offer light resistance. This is harder than it looks, if you so choose. Obviously, if you're training without a training partner, you can also do this with resistance bands. Just loop a resistance band around your rack, put it around your foot, do that pull. If you guys don't already know, Tracy is a USAPL state referee, so she knows a thing or two about the rules.
Yep.
So she's going to tell us which ones we need to follow.
You need to follow all of them. So with when you're training, if you're going to compete, if you already compete, I can't emphasize enough that in your training, you should be training to competition standards. You may not have, even if you're training by yourself, you won't have somebody to give you commands. But if anybody watches any of my training videos, myself and anybody that I'm training, I will have them pause wherever you would get a command. So the commands for squat are you unrack the bar at your own leisure, your own pace. You hear bar is ready. That's the first thing you hear. Let's say that. Let's start at the beginning. You get 1 minute from the time that you hear bar is ready to when you get your squat command. So in that minute seems like it's going really fast, but that's a lot of time. You can take your time, like I said earlier, with your setup, get nice and tight, and get everything all ready for that. So bar is ready, and Zack will walk up to the bar, take his time. No, you can't do that on the platform.
Oh, that's right. See,
everything.
That's a fault. That's a fault that I've been guilty of.
Yes. You can adjust your belt on the platform, but you cannot adjust. You have to have knee sleeves. Everything has to be ready before you step on that platform.
See how I'm already messing it up?
Yes.
Dude, exactly. I'm already messing up. So yeah, get your wrist wraps secured before you actually head out.
Yeah, wrist wraps, everything ready. Glad you did that, because that's a good point. So you get everything ready, and then you can adjust your belt on, they don't care when you adjust your belt, and you walk up to the bar. You unrack the bar, get everything, you don't have to wait for anybody to tell you to unrack the bar. So you do your setup, ritual, get nice and tight. The judges are looking for your knees to be locked out. So that's a fault that I'll see a lot of people do initially, is they're wondering why they're not getting the squat command. The refs are on the side with their hands up, waiting for you to be locked out, and we'll yell, "Lock your knees!" Not always, but usually if it's a meet where there's new lifters, we will. So lock those knees. Then the head ref will say squat. They are looking for depth, and then rack. What we are looking for is depth, which is, obviously there's no question with Zack's. They are looking for your hip crease, the top of your hip crease to be, your hip joint to be below the top of your knee. So that's in training. If you're not at that point right now, that's fine, you work to it. But if you're going to compete, the depth is the most important rule that they're looking for. Right. So the faults would be, you have to have your grip. Your thumb does not count as a finger, so you can have a thumbless grip, but your other four fingers must be on the rack, on the bar. Your knees need to be locked. Looking for depth. You can rock back and forth on your feet, but you cannot step. Your foot cannot move at all. Okay? You cannot double bounce at the bottom. So there can be no downward motion at all. If you're grinding up through a lift, you can stop. You can come to a complete stop, but if it goes down at all, that's a fault. So,
what about moving your fingers on the bar?
You can't, no, the four fingers have to stay on.
They have to stay, not adjust.
Right.
Some of our lifters do that.
Yeah.
Move the fingers and they...
Yeah, you can't open fingers. So you can't, your thumb can come off the bar, but the other two, okay. I mean the other four. I'm having trouble counting fingers, exactly. So that your hands, they cannot move at all, and your feet cannot move. I used to know with the feet, I used to think that heels couldn't come up. It can come up, just can't move at all. Okay. So it's fine. But the most common faults are in squat are depth and lock knees. And the new ins or knee sleeves make your knees not look locked very much at the top, so you have to almost accentuate it a little bit at the top. So that's it with the commands. So that's the faults for squat. I think I got everything. Did I miss anything? Oh.
I think just one. This goes for squat and deadlift, or squat and bench. Don't jump the command.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that was...
So if you begin your squat, without the squat command,
yes,
DQ'd. If you rack the weight before you get the rack command, no good.
Yep.
So it's very simple, it's very basic, but when you're out there, adrenaline's going, crowd is going, music's going, you just got to be laser focused on that head referee who is giving you the commands.
Yep. And there's nothing worse as a referee of seeing somebody that I know it's their first meet miss a command. It's heartbreaking seeing them get a lift and then miss the command. So in training, the best thing that you can do for that is pause. I will give my new lifters a 5-second pause. I'll tell them unrack, get in your position, stand there. You don't necessarily have to do it 5 seconds, but I tell them, 3 to 5 seconds, I make them wait and then do their squat, and at the end, just wait and then rack. So in any of my training videos, that I do, it's just habit. So if you do that every single set, then it's in your head. You don't want to have to think about that on meet day, because you're going to be worried about enough other stuff than to have to worry about commands. So I just practice it with every set. If you're going to compete, I would do that, and that'll help kind of reinforce.
What about the knees? Do they ever usually call soft knees? Like they'll give you the rack and you'll wait for it, but they'll give you a red because you didn't lock. Is
Right.
that a
Yeah.
fault?
At the end, if you've
Okay.
come up, yeah,
Yeah.
you have to be locked at the beginning of the lift, and you have to be
'Cause
locked
they'll
at the
give
end.
you the rack sometimes, even if you have soft knees at the top, won't they?
Right. They'll give it to you, but if the other refs see, so you have 3 refs for a reason. So the head ref might not be able to tell that you have soft knees,
Okay, so
but the
that's
side refs
wrong.
may.
Okay.
So if a side ref sees that you have soft knees, but the head ref has already, said rack, then the side ref can give the same thing with at the beginning. If one ref sees that you have soft knees, then they're going to, even though one of the refs put down their arm and the head ref thinks, oh, it looks okay to me, then they'll go ahead and tell you squat. Yeah.
Okay, so
Stop.
I didn't know.
Yep. So it's, 3 of them, but same thing with commands. If you miss your command, don't just like go, oh, keep doing that, because sometimes the refs may not see that you jumped that command, or it's so loud because people are screaming. It's a pro tip.
Keep going.
Finish the lift, because you may get a white light, because if it's so loud, they may not know that you jumped the command and still give you white even though you did. So, yep. So you never know. That's why there's 3 refs. That's all. You're getting 3 different perspectives, and that's what makes it fair, I believe.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar, every lift is judged by 2 side referees and 1 head front referee.
Yep.
And they will either give you a white light or a red light, and it's best 2 out of 3.
Yep.
So again, that's why you practice with technical perfection to the best of your ability. And you never know, there's certainly quote unquote hard refs, quote unquote easy refs. That should not even enter your mind. You're going out there and you're executing your lift regardless of who's in the room, regardless of how they're looking at you, regardless of who it is. But yeah, you do have 3 judges. It is 2 out of 3. If there's anything maybe that one ref sees, one ref, another one doesn't matter. You're just there to execute to the best of your ability.
Yeah. Yeah, and my reminder from my very first meet, obviously Zach's my coach, I had on my very first meet, rather than trying to think about so many different cues and commands and different things that I had to remember, I had on the top of my program and the top of my meet card, I would tell myself, I perform all my lifts with technical perfection. And that reminded me of all of them. Just take my time and focus on that. And I can tell you, in next, December will be my 20th meet. I've never missed a command once. So it's, and I know it's because of that, because,
Yeah.
Yep. So just practice like you compete. And if you do it over and over again, it just becomes second nature the day of the meet, and makes things a lot easier.
Any questions about competition standards for the squat? All right. So we're going to wrap up our squat tutorial here with a few of our favorite variations on the squat.
Yep.
So this is kind of like the cherry on top. Again, everything that we're kind of showing you here is building off of the previous.
Yep.
So,
Right, so we chose for each of the lifts, we chose our top 3 variations, and I believe that these variations are across the board, whether you're a beginner or advanced. They're ones I incorporate in my training, they're ones I incorporate in pretty much anyone who I coach. I feel like they provide the most benefit. So for squat, the 3 are pause squat, tempo squat, and pin squat. So for which you've seen, yeah, you can. So let's say for pause squat, why would I use that as a variation? It lets you take your time. Usually a pause squat will force you, if you watch people who are squatting, who take that rebound, and sometimes they'll have that instability, pause squats will force you to slow things down at the bottom, force you to keep that tension, that active negative that Zach was talking about, because you're going to lose that rebound effect. You're going to stay super tight and then push up. It lets you practice that, keeping that tension. Then up. Take your time. I suggest, like you're talking about filming your training, filming your training is a very valuable resource, especially with squats. You film it, if you film it from the side, like I was talking about with keeping that bar over your midfoot, if you're doing a pause squat, watch where that bar is over your midfoot. If it's too far front, that means you're maybe, you know, leaning too forward, maybe you are too far on your toes. If it's too far back, and again, maybe you need to bring yourself forward more, get a little tighter. But that gives you a lot of visualization as to seeing where that bar is. I love pause squats for that. Again, it can vary. So yeah, not incredibly long. Usually 1 to 2 seconds is generally very good. I used to try to do like 4 and 5 second pauses. It kind of defeats the purpose. I feel like 1 to 2 seconds is perfect. It lets you maintain that tension, stay tight, but then come up. So pause squats are excellent. Tempo squats, you can do tempo pause as well. Tempo just really slows down the tempo coming down even slower. So you can really watch that bar path, how it comes down and then going back up. The goal is to keep that bar path straight up and down. So with a tempo, I like, as they're gonna look at me, probably 5 seconds, 4 seconds, very slow. So 5 seconds, let's do a 5 count.
Imagine 500 pounds on my back.
Yes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause a second, up. Yep. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, up. Okay. And with tempos, I like to, because for some reason, when you have weight on your back and you're doing a tempo squat, somehow numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. So I try to count like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, or 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, just to slow myself down. Because I guarantee you.
If you Google metronome, I make some clients do that.
I've tried a metronome, but trying to listen to a metronome and count and know what number rep I'm on, I'm like, no, I can't.
End up doing like 17 reps.
But some people do. So I just got to where I'll use that. And then the third one are pin squats. And what do you think pin squats would assist with?
Push out of the base.
Yep. Anything else?
More tension. I feel like just like generating that tension, because if you don't have it, you're not going to stand up, or you're going to like have that. So just keeping everything, I feel like it reinforces tension and tightness a lot.
Yep. And it lets you, if you're competing and you struggle with depth, you can set the pins to make sure that you're going to hit depth each time. Some people have trouble feeling. I say some people, most people have trouble feeling whether you're at depth or not. So by setting the pins and filming yourself to where you know you're right at where you need to be with depth, that can help tremendously in knowing about where you need to go. It also kind of takes out that anxiety and fear factor, because once you get to the bar, if you can't come up, or if you lose tension or get in your head too much about it, then just leave the bar on the pins. So, but I like to, with pin squats, I don't want to bounce off the pins. You want to, again, go kind of not slow like a tempo, but go down controlled, set that bar on the pins as quietly as you can, and then up. And you're watching for that positioning, like Karen said, and you're, yep. So you're looking to, so it's a brief pause, but you're maintaining that on there. So we wanted to let you all try some of these. With pins, I can help you, like if you don't know, if you haven't done them before, because I want to help y'all with pin squats. We'll kind of look at setting the pins, maybe even a little bit higher to start with. It's better to go higher and then adjust it as needed, kind of see where you are. But start with maybe try a few pause squats just with the bar, some tempo, and get a feel for. Really focus as you're doing it. You're slowing down. Focus on thinking about what you're doing and feeling that upper back tension, feeling that slow active negative. By slowing everything down, you have the time that you can really, really think about that as you do it. So let's go ahead and, yep.
So now we're going to move on to the bench press, and we're going to get started with some mobility warm-ups. So the big bugaboo with the bench press is obviously our shoulders and T-spine. Areas that a lot of us get tight in from our daily lifestyles of being on the computer, being on the phone, driving our cars, whatever else we're doing. We're probably doing it with slumped shoulders, rounded T-spine, head jutted forward. Oh, getting a headache just thinking about it. So obviously there's tons of things that we could do that would be very specific to the bench press, but honestly, for most of us, we just need to get our shoulders loosened up, our shoulders warm, our T-spine mobile, and these drills are going to help us do that. So the first thing that we're going to do is the swimmer rotation. So give yourself just a little bit of space, maybe like some arm's length space. What we're going to start by doing is a little internal-external rotation of the shoulders. We're not necessarily going to be worried about touching our fingers behind the back. Don't worry about that. This is going to be like a dynamic stretch, a dynamic movement. So I'm going to turn around so you can see what's going on behind me. We're simply going to take one hand, reach up the back, the other hand, reach down the back for a second, and then we'll pivot and switch. For a second, and pivot and switch. Now, while you're here, you can actually take this down hand and push it against your back. That'll give you a little extra here. Okay, again, we're talking about adding appropriate amounts of tension into end ranges of motion. You can actually take your hands and add a little push into the back just to activate some of that shoulder stuff. So, you don't need to do that very hard, but once you get this pattern, you push in a couple times, we're going to go a little bit faster. A little bit faster. And feel free to kind of turn and look over the shoulder, over the downside shoulder, left and right. We'll do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is the split swimmer. Now we're going to do both hands at the same time. So, both hands reach up, both hands reach down. Here, you can kind of push the backs of the hands together as they reach down. Again, in the interest of just adding a little tension, fly out. Backs of the hands reach up against the back, and again, the backs of the hands can push lightly into your back. That's kind of the slow, tension-oriented version. And now we're going to loosen up and go a little bit faster. Reach, reach. And you can do a little forward bend as you reach back. That's totally fine. We're not worried about being super strict here. We're just getting lots of novel movement into those arms and shoulders. Woo! That's the swimmer. How's everybody feel doing that? Hurts in a good way, I hope.
Just on this side.
Right. Again, the point here is not to like drive for as much, flexibility or range of motion as you can. It's just to reach back there, get the arms moving, get the shoulders warmed up. Okay? So that's a split swimmer and the traditional swimmer of both hands together. If you want to do this a hardcore version, you could do that swimmer rotation on the ground, belly down, face down, and try to do that. You can't compensate, obviously, when you're on the ground. Next movement that we're going to do is the Egyptian twist. One of my favorites. Again, we're doing like equal and opposite movements with each arm and shoulder. So we're going to take one hand, palm up, reaching out to the side. Tip that thumb down and away. So we're going into external rotation on this side, but keep the shoulder down. Still looking over that front side, we're going to take our other hand, reach under like so, palm up to the ceiling that way, and that's full internal rotation. Does that make sense? Now, in one fell swoop, we're going to pivot and switch. So alternate, look over the other side into internal and external rotation. Does that make sense? Really drive those palms to the ceiling and the thumb rotating out as far as you can. Really wring your arms out like a towel and see how I'm like pivoting off of that foot. Pivot and switch. Reach the fingertips to the opposite walls. Wring yourself out like a towel. Pivot and switch. 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 Now for bonus here, you're going to sweep your hands under your armpits as you rotate like so. Touch the armpits or as high up as you can and reach. Does that make sense? Touch the armpits in the middle and reach. One more time. Touch high and reach. Keep those shoulders down and relax. That is the Egyptian twist. Does that make sense? Does that feel okay for everybody? Cool. Swimmers, Egyptians, we're just going to do one more drill here. A very simple rotation of the shoulder joint. The goal here actually really is to find your end range of motion. Ideally, if you had something to hang on to, like a tennis ball, something else you kind of make a fist with, that would be best. Otherwise, we're just going to make a simple fist with your hands, because what we want is some actual grip tension. If you guys ever use like grippers, like actual hand grippers, doing some of these shoulder drills holding a gripper is dynamite. You do that swimmer rotation with a closed gripper, that is killer. It's amazing for your shoulders. Otherwise, just make a fist. So what we're going to do here is we're really going to tap into some of our muscle groups in order to find our range of motion. You guys can do this along with me. We're going to make a fist right here in front of your body. I want you to flex that pec on that side. I want you to flex that lat on that side to pull your shoulder down. And already, as you're driving your thumb towards the midline of the body, you should feel like maybe your pec is going to cramp up. That's a good sign. Again, keeping the shoulder down, we're going to start by reaching, reaching, reaching overhead. And what you'll find is as you reach up, you'll lose some of that pec and lat tension. Unfortunately, that's just part of the gig. But here, you're going to drive your fist and your thumb as far back as you can without scrunching the neck, without scrunching the shoulder up, and without leaning back. Let's keep our position here. From here, we're going to turn the wrist away. Does that make sense? Turn the wrist away to try to reach behind you. And then, again, without twisting too much, we're going to reach, 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 back, back, back. Try to reach to the midline of the body behind you. And then as we come all the way back down to our side, we're going to drive our pinky forward. So if my hand was open, my pinky would be here. And we've ended up where we started, only rotated this way. Does that make sense? Now we're going to go back from whence we came. I'm going to demonstrate this with my palms open. You can go palms open or closed. It's just another way to do it. This might kind of help you see a little bit better. We're going to go back, driving my thumb high to the ceiling. Without leaning over, I'm going to drive my thumb as high as I can, staying tall. Now I'm going to unwind. I'm going to reach my palm away. Now we've got space to come all the way back up to our overhead position. And then as we come back down, we're going to re-engage the pec, re-engage the lat as we reach towards the midline of that body. And relax. How does that arm feel? Do you feel like kind of loose but strong and pliable on this one side that we just worked, and maybe a little kind of stiff in the side that you haven't worked? So you can kind of feel the actual effect that this drill is making. We're going to do this other side. We're going to go a little bit faster, okay? Again, you can do this with closed fists. I'm going to demonstrate on this side with an open hand because I think you can probably see the rotation a little bit better. Pec, lat, squeezed. Create space here to the midline of the body. Pec is on. Now we're going to reach to our straight overhead position, driving the thumb back, back, back. While you're here, this is one of our end ranges. Flex that pec. That's not your pec. That's your tricep. Flex that too. So again, while we're here, reach. Reach for the ceiling, but don't elevate the shoulder. You do that by flexing your tricep. Now that we're here, we're going to turn the wrist away, and we're going to reach back to the midline of the body. We don't want to be way out here. We want to keep driving back, 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 till we come all the way down to our side, and then we're reaching that arm forward back from whence we came. You had it right. Yep. Pinky is leading. Now we're in this full internal rotation of the arm. Got to remind myself to keep that shoulder down. Now we've got that pec in our lat again. Sweep the thumb back. Reach, 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 that palm to the ceiling. Now we're going to unwind, finish into our overhead. Flex that tricep. Back down. Right back where we started, re-engaging the pec, re-engaging the lat. And relax. Woo! How do you feel?
I couldn't feel my pecs get tight. I could feel my shoulders. I could feel my lats.
That is going to be something that we are going to address very soon. Very soon. So, does everybody feel like even just from doing that stuff, your bench might feel a little smoother? Yeah? So with some of this stuff, like especially that like shoulder rotation, you almost want to imagine that you're moving through quicksand or wet concrete. So going all the way back to our first drills, like with the Iron Lizard, use muscular tension to work against yourself. Don't just flop your arm around. Think resist. Move in a certain direction, but also resist that movement with your own muscular tension.
How many reps per side do you recommend for a mobility warm-up drill?
Most people don't have the time or the patience for very much. So I would say like swimmers, 20 to 30 seconds. Egyptians, 20 to 30 seconds. I kind of like to do like the hard hold for like one on each side and then flow with it for 15 seconds. And honestly, this stuff, maybe 1 or 2 per side. Tracy, am I missing anything?
Yep.
Tracy's doing this stuff all the time.
Yeah, the shoulder rotations I do all throughout the day. I do about 2 to 3 each side. A little, faster pace, but I do it before all the lifts. And if you sit at a computer all day, just getting that rotation is really good for your shoulders.
You know what's another fun one that just came to me off the top of my head? The wrist rotation.
Yep.
It's like a mirror effect.
Yep.
With the wrists. This is a really fun one. You can really flare your elbows around. You can get kind of dramatic with it. And that also just kind of helps mobilize the T-spine, the elbows, the wrists, the fingers, and then you can go the opposite way. You kind of almost want to think about making contact around the wristwatch area. Wherever your wristwatch would be, that's where you want to maintain contact between the wrists. I'm doing this one all the time. My wrists get really stiff. You know, jiu-jitsu, grabbing onto gis all day, you know, hand fighting all day, and then you're texting all day. So like your wrists and your fingers get all jammed up. A few minutes of this every day. It's also another really good one to help warm up for pretty much any of this stuff where you're going to be gripping a bar hard, which is pretty much all of your training. So, any questions on our warm-up stuff there? Okay. Let's get into the bench press proper.
Zack is going to get under the bar with his eyes directly under the bar. He is going to get high up on his traps, chest up, creating an arch, which he's going to go into a little more detail on. Grip, I would suggest not having a wide grip to start with, but not being too narrow. So maybe kind of like reach up at about a 90-degree angle, and then you can adjust it by there what feels strong. So you will grip that bar nice and tight up on your traps, really wedge yourself in. Foot position, perfect. I like to have you start with angling them out a little bit just to really be able to get that leg drive and tension. So now Zack's going to take a big breath, squeeze everything, already going to start doing some leg drive, and unrack the bar, bring it forward, really squeeze down and rotate those. You want your shoulder blades down and back, depressed into the bench. Shoulders should not be protracted, should be retracted. And then he is going to pull the bar down, controlled, to about the lower part of the sternum, usually, not everybody. Motionless, and then he is going to push the bar up and rack it back. So some things that he is thinking about, again, you want your shoulder blades down and back. They should not protract at all. They should be nice, tight, again, the entire time. Big breath that you're going to hold into your belly. And then when he brings that bar down, nice and controlled, tight, squeezing the bar to also get that tension. Hips are, glutes are squeezed, maximum tension, leg drive. He's pushing not up to where your butt would come up. You don't want that. He's pushing back. That would almost shift you back. You're almost thinking of pushing, you're trying to push you're using your legs to push so hard with you're so tight that you're pushing your collarbone up towards you. Okay, so now when he pushes, when he presses, go ahead and press, and then rack. So the more tension that you have, the entire lift, so not just when you're coming down and ready to press, you want that leg tension and constant body tension the entire lift. From the time you unrack, that is the start of the lift. And you're wanting to maintain that tension the entire time. For the bar path, if you're looking just like with the squat, you're looking for it to go up and down. With the bench press, you're not. You're in an arch position. So when you're in an arch position, if you press straight up, you're actually pressing more forward. So the bar if you're pressing it up straight, it would actually go at a little angled position. But to get the best bar path, and again, this takes practice over time, you really want to have that tension, and it will go almost like a J. So it goes back a little and then up, and then pull the bar rack back. Yep. Okay. And Zack is kind of low, so there's different bar positions you can rack. Yep, so he's right now right at his sternum. Some people do lower. It depends on where you grip. He has a narrower grip. So if you have a narrower grip, you're going to pull the bar down a little bit lower on your, I guess not really on your stomach, but below your sternum. If you have a wider grip, then you might be a little bit higher, because you want your elbows not to flare out. You're trying to keep everything nice and tight. And yep, and go ahead and press. So that way, when you press, depending on where you are gripping that bar, experiment. So go ahead and grab wider again, a little bit wider. So when I say wider, again, this is, yep. So you see how he's grabbing the bar wider? Go ahead and pull it down. And now he's a little bit higher. And then press. And then rack. And then let's try just a little narrower grip. Yep. So if you are going to feel more comfortable with a narrower, what Zack did was put his thumb out, a thumb width out. That's a good width to start if you feel more confident with a narrower grip. And then bring that bar down, it will be a little lower because to keep that nice, tight, yep, up and then back. Okay, so we're going to try that, and then we're going to go into a little bit more. Zack's going to talk a little bit more about the arching. We're going to talk about leg drive, breathing, and a little bit more of the technical. But we want to have you set up the safeties. You want to set, when you're setting safeties up, which I encourage using, you know, in training if you have access to them, you want to set them to where they're not so, yeah, go ahead and I don't think we really have them set here, but these racks may be a little bit challenging with that. But you want it to be where if you set the bar back that it's not going to hit your face or your neck. So we probably have them a little higher on this one. But you don't want them to, you do not want to hit the safeties when you're coming down on your chest. But if you set the safeties, if you're squatting in a rack, benching in a rack or benching on, you know, a competition rack, if you set the safeties, that's going to help you a lot more with confidence as well, because you're not going to have that fear, mental fear, when you're benching that you're going to drop it on you. So I would set them, again, we would probably, for Zack, set it just a little bit higher, but not much, because we don't want it to hit it when it's on his chest.
We're all laying down on the same bench. Our alignment is going to be more or less the same. What really makes the difference is what's going on internally with these internal tension cues. And so that's what we're going to layer on top right now.
Yep. So leg drive, which I've mentioned, and I said we'd go into more detail, something I'm constantly working on as well, trying to get more of. The goal is to have constant leg drive from the time you unrack the bar all the way through the lift. And so what I mean by leg drive is not that I'm laying on the bench and I'm just pushing up. The goal with leg drive that you want to think of is I'm on the bench, and when I push, I'm almost trying to push myself back on, have so much tension. I'm squeezing everything, squeezing my glutes, squeezing my quads, all the way down. My feet are rooted into the floor, and as I push, I'm almost trying to push myself to where I would go back off of the bench. But because I'm rooted very strongly, tightly, my upper traps, everything's nice and tight, depressed into that bench, holding a heavy weight, I'm not going to go anywhere. So if you're very tight, you're not going to move. Where your leg positions, where your feet go, again, is preference. But I like to be a little bit closer to the bench because I feel like you can get tighter. I also like to have my foot kind of stacked, my toes almost a little bit just behind my knees. My knees might be a little bit in front, but stacked. So that kind of stacked theme again, keeping everything stacked. Also, which I didn't mention, is when you're holding onto the bar, stacked position. So I'm going to be holding the bar tight. I'm not going to hold it while I want it to be stacked. I want it to be stacked in my hand down to my elbow. But I can't have the bar, I don't want my wrists to be completely straight, or I'm going to be pushing that bar forward. So you do want it to be cocked some, not all the way back, because if it was sitting here, the bar sitting here, I'm going to lose all that tension. That's not a strong way to be holding the bar. If the bar is right here, where I'm holding it, so I got my grip See, if I was like this, that's not strong. I'm gonna throw that bar in front of me. Cock it back a little. I got a very, very strong, solid stacked position right now. It's resting here, but the weight is pushing through my arm. So I'm holding on to that. That was kind of a little diversion from leg drive, but that's important as well because I have everything super tight up at the top. So my legs are, for foot position, again, angles, I like to angle it out a little bit. I actually start with my feet up on the bench so that I can get into my traps. USAPL allows that. IPF federations do not any longer, so I think it's important to kind of be able to do it both ways. But you want to set your feet close to the bench. I have it angled out. Everything's not as tight as I can be. Some people are more comfortable with a little forward, but I feel like you can get better tension at least by starting out trying to be closer. So I am set up under the bar, eyes directly under the bar. I am right now, before I even unrack, I'm taking a big breath, squeezing, and I have leg drive already going. That should feel nice and light because I've got that tension ramped up. Now, as I'm bringing the bar down, that leg tension is constant. Nice and controlled, active negative, pause, up, and back. So I'm so tight when I'm training and doing these reps that I'm exhausted just by doing the bar because I'm trying to keep everything nice and tight. And when you get that leg drive right, you can feel it and the bar will just, fly up. So sometimes I get to the bottom and I watch and I'll see that I have that little push, which is fine. It means I'm using leg drive, but it also means that I probably need to ramp it up a little bit at the beginning. So anyway, we want to try that. That's one point, leg drive. Second point is, again, just like with the squat, we want that active negative. So you don't want the bar. It's important that once you unrack, you're nice and tight. You don't want to lose that tension by just letting the bar come down. You want to keep that control, keep everything nice and tight, bring that bar, again, fast, but tight. Controlled, and then you rack.
How do you increase the speed of the push?
For going up.
Yeah.
So you're looking at it as, the way I like to look at bench in particular is that it's almost like a slingshot to where you're going to let go. So if you are really, really ramping that tension, keeping your leg drive, everything super tight, and then you think just push, let it explode off the chest. If everything is really tight, you're basically setting yourself up for that to move. So I like, which we'll get into when we get into the accessories, why I train, again, very similar to the squats, lots of pause, lots of tempo where I focus slow down, but then explosive up with a good pause because it lets you really, I see, a lot of people when they're training, they're just bouncing it off their chest. Well, one, you're not maximizing your strength and tension with that, but you're not training yourself for that explosiveness from that pause position. And obviously if you compete, you got to do that pause. Plus it makes you stronger. Even if I didn't compete, that's how I would do it. So, but any kind of like pause, even a light touch pause to where you're really, I'll do, pauses where I'll pause it above the chest, like just really tight and then focus on pushing up. Just the constant training and trying to focus on keeping that leg drive the whole time. Breathing, when you're breathing, I take a big breath before I unrack, so that way I'm nice and, again, focusing that bracing. But I also take another big breath right before, so I don't lose all the breath I just took, but I just take another inhalation just to make sure that I have a full breath before I bring the bar down. Exhaling, I hold, like we were talking, I will hold my breath, but sometimes let maybe a little bit out as I get to the top. If you let air out, you don't want to let it out like you're losing all tension. You would want to let it out like we were talking about, like a tss, So if you go, just do like, you can feel that you brace. So that's what you would want to do with this as well. So I hold it and then at the top maybe let it out if I need to. So those are the, the leg drive is probably is the most important thing that to practice and benefit. And then you're going to talk about the arches.
Yeah, for sure.
Bit, just to kind of help. He has a really great analogy for kind of how the arches work.
So the two ideas, again, that you can kind of use to solidify everything that Tracy just said. One thing with the constant tension leg drive. How does she not slide off the bench? Why does she not if she's actually using all this leg drive? Well, when she comes down, the whole point of the arch, one thing is we have a mechanical advantage, as we were talking about, it mimics the decline bench press. Right? So from that standpoint, we have that mechanical advantage. Another point is we're distributing the tension into the upper body, into the chest. We're not letting it dissipate to where she actually pushes herself back off the rack, off the bench. So the way, I should say the structure of the arch itself allows us to direct that line of force. So we know that we have this arch of the spine going like this, from the butt to the traps or base of the shoulders. We also have two other arches. Does anybody want to guess where those two other arches lie? Yes. Where's the other one? Close. The hips, the glutes. So here are the three arches. We have the global arch of the spine that goes this way. We also have an arch from hip to hip, the glutes. The glutes form an arch over the hip. The pinning of the shoulders back and down with the lats, with the upper back, create an arch this way over the shoulders. So when we put these three arches together, at the base, at the top, bridging them. This is more of a visual than anything else. I'm not talking actual physics here. I'm not talking civil engineering. I'm talking about visualization, how we're visualizing tensing the body and the muscles. The glutes are on. That's why you see a lot of us cramp in the hamstring or in the glute or in the the glute med, or the outer part of the hip. That's a good sign. It means you're creating that hip arch. Same thing here. We know that we want to pin those shoulders back and down. We want to hide the shoulder joint down behind into the muscular shelf of the pecs and the lats. We've got this arch, and we're connecting that arch through the spinal arch. When all of these things are tight and lined up, when you do your leg drive, everything gets focused here. And then that helps you press directly up. It's kind of a simple way of tying all that visualization together. Does that make sense? So keep those visualization cues in mind. The very last part, with the active negative. In the same way that we said to pull yourself down into the squat, you want to think about rowing the bar to your chest. Now, I'm sure, with everything that I just said, you have a great arch when you set up. But a lot of us, no matter how tight we are with our technique, oftentimes, by the time we get to the bottom, we've lost a little bit of our arch. A little bit of it has flattened. So what can we do? We can re-engage the arch at the bottom. Now, I know Will Smith is maybe a touchy subject this year, but one of my favorite Will Smith movies is Hitch. Does anybody remember? Oh, yeah. Does anybody remember the Hitch tip that he gave to Kevin, what's his name, when he was going in for the kiss? 90-10. You go in 90, let her come in 10. That's what we're going to do with the bench press. We're going to come down 90%, And then Tracy's gonna match 10% with her arch. And then she's gonna come up. She has such a great arch. I don't know if that was 10%, but you get the idea.
Okay.
So we'll come down 90, pause, the chest meets 10, and then drive. Very nice. So, Tracy, from a competition standpoint, technically that doesn't break any rules, right?
No.
There's
I try
no-
to do it in a seamless way, but you want to do something that makes you think of it. But no, you can't heave, you can't bring the bar down and then back up, but there's nothing about raising your chest.
Yeah. So that may or may not be something that's appropriate with like super heavy weights, but as you warm up, as you train with sub-maximal weights, that's something that you can practice. Down 90, raise 10 to meet the bar, and launch it. And then over the course of time, that won't even be 90-10. You'll just automatically ramp that arch up as you're coming down. So instead of it being 2 steps, it'll just be 1 seamless motion.
Yep.
Make sense? Let's practice that.
Yep.
In general, no matter powerlifting or no matter what your fitness methodology, pecs are one of those things where it's like, it would seem like every bro who's had years of chest day workouts would be able to have good pec control, good pec strength. But honestly, that's often not the case. Oftentimes we have overdeveloped delts, triceps, and the pecs are kind of left out of the picture. And with the way that I think about it, the pecs and the lats are like our first line of shoulder defense. Everybody wants to talk about working the rotator cuff, working all these muscles that you can't even spell. Why don't you worry about engaging your lats and your pecs first, the big muscles that actually move big weights? So if you don't have like a pec deck at your gym, at your home gym, the next best thing is a pec stick. So literally, this is just the old school, 1950s exercise, spring stick. It's just shoulder adduction. It's just flexing the pecs. Now you can kind of cheat a little bit and get the delts involved, but if you keep low, underhands, overhands, calzone, there's a lot of ways you can hack it. And I'm actually coming out with a full pec stick protocol next year. Things to consider for competition. All right, so pay close attention because a lot of people get a lot of red lights.
So yesterday, we'll go over commands, and this is prime example of why I was talking about pausing at each part, because then it becomes used to it. She got a beautiful lift, moved beautifully, and then, but she had missed the start command. So she had already started. Right. Yep. And it's awful to see that happen, but so much is happening around you. You're trying to listen to the judges. Okay, I got to listen for that press command. Well, crap, I just missed the start command. So if you practice the pausing and getting used to that at the beginning, at the end, and the press, but mostly, at the beginning and the end for all sets, then it just becomes habit. And you're always doing it, and it just becomes natural. And so even if you're not necessarily saying the commands in your head, which I don't anymore, I just know I stop, and you're going to get that command in that pause. So if you're doing that just by second nature, then you don't even have to think about it on meet day. So the commands, again, you're standing aside, you get bars ready, you have everything ready. If you wear a belt, you can adjust that. If you don't wear a belt, then you don't need to do anything. You just walk to the platform. You get your minute to set up. You can get liftoff, so you can have, in USAPL, you can't have your coach, so you have to have whoever's on the platform, but you tell them exactly how you want your liftoff. 1, 2, 3, I'm gonna take a breath. So you have that minute, you can tell them and get set up. USPA, you can have your coach. So you can have your coach who you train with, or your lifting partner, or whoever can do the liftoff for you. So you get your liftoff, or self unrack yourself. You don't wait. You just, bar is ready, come up to the bar, get set up, and you wait. Now you pause. Start. Press and rack. Those are the commands. With the press, we are watching. It may seem sometimes like refs are just really mean with a long press command. Maybe some of them are. But what they're looking for is that bar to be motionless. So if you're bouncing it around at the bottom, we're just going to be sitting here waiting. You're not mean, we're just waiting. And then press. And then rack. Again, that's something else. If people in training aren't, you know, waiting or pausing at the end, they're just used to, oh, I just got a PR. Well, red lights. So those are the commands: start, press, and rack. I suggest pretty much trying to train the majority of your time with pauses on your chest. There's a time for touch and go, maybe, you know, through hypertrophy or just to get a feel for a weight so you know you can do it. But the majority of your sets should be done with a brief competition pause, just because you're, one, you're getting stronger by doing that. Two, you're practicing and getting used to holding that, constantly working on maintaining that pause so that it's not moving. So the more you practice that, the better you get at it. So as far as grip, you can grip the widest you can grip. You cannot have your fingers outside of this ring. So you can go, you can have your finger covering it, even your pointer finger. So that has to be covering. I can't see that ring. If I can see the ring, you're too wide. So you come in, so it can be anywhere from where Zack is now, all the way in, as close as you want to be. There's no set on that. You have to have all your thumb and your fingers all have to be, thumb has to be under. You cannot do a false suicide grip, not allowed. So it has to be under. You have to have feet. In USAPL, your feet have to be flat on the floor. You cannot have heels up, cannot have toes up. USPA, you can have heels up, so that's different with Federation. Yep, exactly. So feet have to be flat on the floor. They can slide, so if you're doing your leg drive and all of a sudden your feet slide, as long as your heel and toes don't come up, you're fine. If your foot comes up, then that's red light. If you use the support, the bench for support, like to help push, well, that's a red light too. You can't come in contact at all with the bench. That would be kind of awkward. Your shoulders have to stay on the bench, cannot come off the bench, although that would be kind of awkward as well, but they can't. Head used to not be able to come off the bench, now it can, so that's not an issue anymore with any of the federations, at least the USPA or USAPL. Your butt must stay on the bench. So it cannot, and I'll tell you, that's the one thing I watch for all the time, because I know I have to constantly train mine. It cannot, and by not coming up, now you can have leg drive and it can move, but if I can see daylight under you at all, even for 1 second, that's red. So we're looking for that. So really train and focus on, you know, keeping that down. The bar, when it comes down again, has to be paused, motionless. You cannot heave it, so you get the press command, it can't come down before it goes back up. Now if you bring it down onto your chest and it's, you know, lower when you bring it down before you get the press command, that's fine, as long as it doesn't go back down and then go back up. As it's going up, it cannot come, the bar cannot move down at all. So if you're grinding through and it starts to come down at all and then goes up, it's a red. Your elbows have to be locked out at the top completely. Can't have both at the beginning and the end, just like squats. The bar, if you're pressing it and one side comes up and then the other, that's perfectly fine. It just can't go down. So if it comes up and it's just a little, you know, lopsided, that's okay. You can't, if you run into the rack, that's fine. You just can't use the rack to help you in any manner. Again, I don't really know how that would work, but if you accidentally run into it coming up, it's fine, but as Karen knows, it kind of throws you off.
So when I was going up, and it took like an hour to get it up there, I was inching myself up, and I hit the flips. What I couldn't figure out how to do was get more energy to
Right.
by that time, I don't know if I was tired or I just lost the.
Yep. Well, and one thing with that, which again is another tip, is to, when you're with lockouts, to really squeeze your pinky, because it kind of, even though it's not necessarily doing anything with the bar, it's activating your triceps. So you really squeeze your pinky, squeeze that bar, break that bar, and that can help up at the top. Again, with that constant leg drive as well, but that will help. And doing accessories, which we'll talk about, to cut, if it's losing it at the top part, that's tricep usually. And so you want to do things that really work your triceps. So those are the main. Can you think of, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Yeah, and then jumping, obviously you don't want to jump commands, so waiting on the commands.
Wait for the wrap.
Yeah, wait for the start, wait for the rack, wait for the press. You jump any of them, then it's, you know, red
Another
lights.
kind of quick point that I had to work on was your squat command or your start command on the bench. It's not a race. It's not the starting gun to a race. You don't have to start your squat or start your bench
Right when they say
as soon
it.
as they give the thing. So a lot of times the best thing to do, exercising patience, when you get the start commands, either for the squat or for the bench, take your breath.
Yep.
And then begin the repetition. A lot of times people think as soon as they hear
They just
start, whoa, they go. So it's not a reactive thing. It's not a command to do it right then. It's a command to say,
Now you can start.
You've met the standard at your earliest convenience. Please, let's see your bench press.
Yep.
So take your time. It's not a race.
And that's honestly
It's
why.
the exact opposite of a race, for God's sakes. Powerlifting is.
Exactly. The exact. When I train, that's why when I was talking about breathing, you can take a big breath, unrack, and do it all without losing any tension. Could that be stronger? Absolutely. But if you're competing, you can't control when you're going to get that start command. And if you've trained holding your breath the whole time, and now you're at a meet, and you get that start command and you've been holding your breath already for too long because you had to get the lift off, they had to get out of the way, all of that. Now you haven't trained to take that other breath. And I think taking that other breath right before you start the descent is very important at a meet. Unless you just can hold your breath for that long and not pass out. So, but training that way, again, train the way you're going to compete. And do that every time. And it can, I think out of all three of the lifts, having someone, especially if you do get a lift off, having a lift off, trying to tell them what you want, having them standing above you. My first probably 10 meets or more, I would rush through it because they're waiting for me. I need to get done. Now I don't care. I just block out. I do exactly what I've done in training. I take my time. And it's way stronger. But that's, I think, why you see a lot of people miss their bench. You know, they can't understand why they didn't get what they got in the gym. Well, there's probably a lot of reasons. Maybe they didn't pause. Maybe they just didn't have the strength that day. But a lot of it sometimes is because you rush it when you're at the meet. And some of it's anxiety. Some of it's, you know, again, having all the people having to listen for everything. But some of it is just taking your time and slowing down can make a tremendous difference.
Yeah. So to wrap up bench,
Accessories.
Tracy's going to show us a couple bench variations, again kind of in the same vein as the squat. A lot of it is just going to be kind of based around the competition standards of making sure you're pausing where you need to, making sure you're taking your time with tempo where you need to. So Tracy, take us away.
Yep. And again, these are ones whether you're a beginner or whether you've been, you know, doing it for years and years and years. These are three that I continue. They're always in my training. They're always in my athletes' training. And I think they can help a lot with teaching tension. So the first is pause. Again, long pause, like maybe 3 count pause. Definitely before competition, I would probably do at least your opener, your second attempt with like a 2 count pause, just so you know, because you actually could have a 2 count pause in a meet. You don't know that. So your opener at a minimum, long pause, multiple reps. So again, what would y'all think the benefit of a paused bench would be?
Well, for me, at least.
Yep. Anything else particular?
Hoping that you are weak right off your chest.
Yep. Yep. So learning to hold that tension, maintain that leg drive throughout the entire lift for a longer period of time. But really, if you're, again, paused is excellent if you are not, if you don't have, if you're, I hate saying the word weak ever, if you're less strong off the chest. It's very good to train strength off the chest. So it's always good to incorporate that. I like to do sometimes even like sets of 5 or 6, 3 count pauses. Obviously, it's going to be a lot lower weight, but it lets me really practice on building that. So with a pause, I come down and I hold it, and the goal is to be motionless and then fast up. Motionless, fast up. And then the next one, again, just like squats, would be tempo or tempo pause. So like a 5 count, and you can watch your bar path. Make sure you hit the right touch point. The thing that's nice about tempo bench is that you can really control it and focus on where you're touching. Whereas sometimes if you're bringing it down fast and it's a heavy weight, you don't have time, you're not thinking about it. But if you're doing that, if you're slowing it down, it lets you really focus on where you're touching. You can think about more of the things that you're trying to work on because it's slowed down. And then the third one that I really love, again, is kind of a combination of the two, would be Spoto presses. So with Spoto presses, you will stop, try to find like, it's 1 to 2 inches off your chest is about where you want to be. If you have a sticking point, it might even be good to do just below where your sticking point is, because you're even with a heavier weight for like doubles, even heavier singles, but to where I was doing 5 count Spoto presses. Obviously not crazy heavy, but just to really focus on, I have to stay tight because I'm not relaxing. Sometimes with a pause, which you don't want to do, but Spoto presses will not allow you to do. So with a pause, I could come down, and technically if you wanted to get lazy, you could be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, tight, up. With a Spoto press, you cannot. So I hold this, I'm trying to keep it motionless, leg drive, constant, 1 sec, 1, I'll do the count, the 1 Mississippi. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, fast up. It's not always fast, but you feel it. You maintain that tension. You have to, because if you let go of your tension, it's going to come down on your chest. So I try to make sure I'm watching it and it doesn't come down at all. It gets really challenging. Those 3 variations.
That we put on the bar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I use these as well. Again, I like Spoto presses better because I use these as well. So for these are bench blocks. You can train it by right. That's the point. That's exactly why you shouldn't use this. So with a Spoto press, there are 2 different variations. So I'll talk about this one too, quick. So with Spoto presses, the reason that you want to do them with nothing there is because you may have to go way lighter than you think. And that's okay, because it will teach you that tension. So it's like, you want to find the things, usually the things that I hate doing, the hardest things, are the things I need to. He reminds me of that often. So I don't want to do that single leg, whatever, because it was really hard. Same thing with bench. If something's really hard for you, if it feels awkward and just like bad, then don't do that. But if it's hard, then usually that means it's because it's an area that you found that you can improve. And if you spend time on that, it's going to make you stronger. So it's good. These I actually do like as well. Since you brought it, I'll mention it. This is a board press. So it has different levels. So you can do like, this would be a 2 board press. I love these for like overload. So if you want to train heavy, so you can feel more than like what you can lift, you know, more than like what your 1 rep max was, or like a higher weight for multiple reps, it really works your triceps. So if you struggle with the top, like you were saying, board presses are great.
So which one do you want the 4-inch? Do you want the 2-inch?
I get the what, this has all the different ones.
Right.
I use the 2 board press a lot.
Right.
So I think 1 to 2, but this is like 2 here.
Right.
And that's a good, you know, it's about 2 inches above.
So how much percentage more so you don't go to your max?
You usually, usually by feel. If you haven't done it before, I go by RPE. So I like to go up, and because I feel like then you know kind of where.
So you start at RPE 7?
Right. And usually do it for like maybe 3 to 5 reps. Pause it still. Even if you're doing this, pause it and then up. But you can do high rep for these and really work your triceps. So maybe not as heavy, but do high rep and you'll work your triceps. So I mean, I
need to use that more.
and I like these because you can do them on your own. Just if you use them and you do overload, set your safeties higher, because you don't want to be like stuck and then realize your safeties are down low and you can't, you know, get it right. So always kind of check that. It's just a safety tip with bench in particular.
Right.
But I do love board presses. I think they're great as well. And pin, there's so many variations, but those 3, adding pauses, adding tempo, above. You can also do any of these with like your feet up. So let's say you've got great leg drive and you want to just build your chest strength. Just put your feet up, either on the bench or straight out, you know, Larson press. You can do any of those and really focus on building that tension just in the upper body.
Well, when your arms were going down, they weren't going all the way down. When we were talking about the last one, building that push. You could do that from the floor then, right? Lay on the floor.
Oh yeah. For the Spoto press.
Yeah.
So you can also do, the thing is with the Spoto press, I want you to hold that. If
Right.
you use, I do floor presses as well, but then you can rest on the
You
floor.
rest on the floor.
So with the Spoto press, which that's kind of the hardest of all, you don't have a block to rest, you don't have a floor to rest, you have to stay tight. So that's why, I think that's why that's one of my favorite variations.
So, when it comes to deadlift warm-ups, do we want to start with a kettlebell deadlift?
Yes.
Yeah, so let's all grab a kettlebell, something hefty.
Yep. There's not a whole lot of hefty
and
ones.
I'm just going to take this one.
Yep.
Yeah, and if anybody has a spare,
Yeah, we'll use that.
I'll snag your spare.
We can grab one of the big ones. And actually, you probably will.
Take
Yeah.
that one.
I was going to say, Dania, you can take one of the bigger ones.
Yeah. All right. Robbie, all good? Okie dokie, guys.
Want me to demonstrate for you while you talk?
Yes. So the deadlift is a hip hinge movement. The easiest way that we can learn and train the hip hinge is with some sort of tool or weight where all the weight is centered into one place. As far as I'm concerned, the best tool for that job is the kettlebell. So we're going to use a kettlebell to kind of learn some of the basics of the hip hinge of the deadlift and also to warm up for it. So what we're going to do, the benefit of the kettlebell is that we can stand directly over it. You can't stand directly over top of your barbell because it's 7 feet long. Kettlebell is only like 7 inches long. So what we're going to do is stand directly over the weight such that the handle is in line with the ankles, or even slightly behind. So we'll come forward just a little bit there. We don't want the weight in front of you. We want the weight directly beneath your hips or your center of gravity. So with long arms, we're simply going to push the hips back until our hands reach the handle, grip, chest up, squeeze your rear end, stand, and we're going to lock out here. So with your lockout, let us be sure that we're not hyperextending the back or that we're not leaning forward. Leaning backward. and that we are being sure to lock out all the muscles that we're using. So the quads, they are tight. How do you think we're balanced on the feet? I'm sorry, what was that? Mid-foot. While you're here, make sure you're not pitch forward on the toes. Make sure you're not rocking back on your heels. This is a good way to double check how you're locking out. Are you on the midfoot? So you should feel equal balance, equal weight through the entirety of the foot. Okay? To set the weight down, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to push the hips back, make sure the weight doesn't drift forward, right back where we started. So what you'll notice here, that the weight will have a tendency to want to drift forward. I want you to keep that from happening by tensing both the tricep and the lat. So we want to think about protecting the armpit. Does that make sense? So let's all do 4 or 5 more kettlebell deadlifts at your convenience, at your leisure. Kettlebell deadlift, because the weight is between the feet and our hands have to reach inside the legs, this is what you would call a sumo stance deadlift. All right? So obviously that has bigger implications as we move on to the barbell, but the kettlebell is just an easy way to work the hip hinge pattern, to kind of refine, again, the lat engagement, the midfoot balance, the pushing of the hips back, and the keeping of the chest up. Great way to warm up, great way to teach the basics of the hip hinge and the deadlift. Any major questions with our kettlebell deadlift there? Okay. So now for our next exercise, we can do this loaded or unloaded. Either way is fine. Maybe with the kettlebell that you have there. We're going to be working the hip hinge. We're just going to be doing it on one leg. On one leg. For the single leg deadlift. So here's the idea. I'm going to demonstrate first like free standing, then I'm going to show you some options that we can use for assistance. I'm going to spot myself here in the mirror so I can check my form. We're actually going to start the single leg deadlift with a kick forward of the leg, and then we're going to sweep that leg back so that it is approximately in line with the spine. I'm reaching my back heel to the back wall. My front leg is slightly bent from the knee, but I'm really thinking about reaching my butt, my tailbone to the back wall. Squeeze, stand, and regain your balance. It's not a teeter-totter. It's not a seesaw. You're actively pulling or pushing, depending on your perspective, that back leg back. And believe it or not, even though I'm not using any weight, I must keep my lats tight in order to stabilize my upper body. We don't want to be loose. We want to be tight. Squeeze and stand. Now, if you need to use a little balance assist, just hold on to anything with pretty much either hand. Tight. Remember, little kick forward, sweep kick back, reach for the back wall, stay tight through the lats, squeeze and stand. The loaded version.
Go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to need to use some assistance here. Oh, Lord. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself. It's going to be a little bit tricky with the weight in front, but we kind of want this sweep kick forward because we want to engage the hip flexors on our floating side first. So maybe I'll just sweep around that kettlebell as I come back. I'm pushing, 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 pushing my hips back because I want that big stretch in that glute. When I grab a hold of my weight on my opposite side from my working foot, what do you think is going to be the first thing I want to do before I actually lift this weight? Was I flying out? Yes, what else? Protect the armpit. pull the shoulder back, tighten through the lat. We don't want a loose lat here. Because actually what we're also trying to train here is the engagement of the lat as part of the posterior chain. Hamstrings, glutes, spinal erectors, certainly lats. Tight, float, squeeze, and stand. Even here when you've got a little bit of weight, you can do just that little forward kick, push, reach for the back wall, as much or as little balance as you need. You can set the weight down in between, or you can float. Obviously, using a kettlebell with our different limb lengths, you might want to float. You might want to set the weight down in between. You could even set the weight down on an elevated surface like a plate. Let's just take a minute and practice a single leg deadlift, both without weight and maybe with a little bit of weight, maybe 3 to 5 reps on each side. Single leg deadlift is one of the basics, one of the best drills. Again, you don't really need to work this for like heavy weights or super duper high reps or anything like that. Slow tempo. And what you're doing here is you're mentally, physically refining this idea of push hip back, counterweight forward. Push hip back, counterweight forward. And even though there's a balance, it is a balance under tension. It is not a simple seesaw. It is not a simple stacking of the joints. It's muscular engagement to find that balance. And if you can do it on one leg, you can definitely do it on two. Last main mobility drill that we're going to go over today, specifically for the deadlift. It's actually not specifically for the deadlift, so I should kind of watch what I say there. This is actually kind of a catch-all exercise that is going to help strengthen the QL muscles, quadratus lumborum, which are the small muscles here on the low back, which, as you can imagine, really get worked with the deadlift and all of our hip hinge movements. It's a traditionally kind of under-trained muscle group, which has kind of been the theme so far today, because it's kind of hard to isolate outside of this goofy thing that I'm going to show you right now. But it's a great way to warm up and strengthen the lower back. It's a great way to warm up and strengthen the hip flexors and low abs. It's called the QL walk or the butt walk. And it's probably exactly what you're thinking. We're going to sit up nice and tall, and we are going to scoot your hindquarters side to side, forward and backward. We're hiking hips side to side and walking on your hip bones. Keeping tall, keeping straight legs, toes to the ceiling. It looks like this. Just like walking, I have this contralateral pattern with my shoulders. See that? So I'm using my hip flexors and quads to lift my legs just a little bit. And obviously the QLs are hiking my hips side to side to actually facilitate the walk. Looks goofy, but it's very effective. You can do this just body weight. You can hold a little kettlebell. You can do this with hands behind your noggin or your hands straight up overhead, again, in the interest of working that posture and the upper back. A good mix there of very, very specific drills and ideas that will translate to the barbell deadlift, getting into the single leg, exposing some asymmetries, and teaching you and challenging the fine art of counterbalance, counterweight, midfoot balance, and then the QL walk is just helping to fill gaps that otherwise we don't really think about. So specifically getting into the QLs, into the hip flexors, again, a great catch-all warm-up and cool down for the deadlifts and to a large degree your squats as well.
Okay, I'll do conventional first because it's the best. It's just what I'm stronger in. Everybody always says sumo's cheating. If it was cheating, I would be doing it. So it's just harder for me. So we'll go through both. They both have the same overall concept with wedging, stacked, being tight, bracing, everything hinging back. All that's the same, yet sumo is, in my mind, more technical and harder to do. So I always like to start, if you're a beginner, I like to start with conventional, and then you can kind of get a feel for experimentation and figuring out which feels the best. So execution, the steps, you'll walk up to the bar. The goal, you want to have the bar over your midfoot, maybe a little bit slightly back, but mostly over your midfoot when you come down. Stance, start a little close. You don't want to be too close, but about kind of like I'm standing right now, and then you can adjust. I'm going to come down to the bar, and I'm going to reach, loose arms. I'm just going to reach down. I don't want to be too far out, don't want to be too far in. So I kind of let my arms come down tight next to me. I'm hinging back, grabbing that bar, getting nice and tight. Now I'm in my nice hinge position again. Hip height will vary, and I'll go into detail as far as how you kind of determine that. You want to keep the bar nice and close to you the whole time. This is key. When we actually do the lift, you want to look, if you're looking for anything, you want to look for the bar to kind of stay under your armpit. So it needs to be a nice kind of straight bar path as well. The goal, again, just like with the squats, is to keep that bar to stay over your midfoot, because in a stacked position you're going to be nice and strong. Keep that tension. So loose arms, come down. Now I'm protecting the armpits, like Zach just talked about with the kettlebell deadlift, which means I'm squeezing my lats, getting nice and that upper body nice and tight. And now, even though I'm holding on the bar tight, I don't want you to think of a deadlift as a pull, even though it's called a pull. It's really a push. It's your legs. So you want to think of pushing the floor away. And that machine is the best, because thinking of it as a leg press, and I'm pushing 500 pounds away from me. I'm pushing the earth away from me. So when I come down, nice grip. When I wedge into the bar, which means I'm bringing my hips into the bar, I'm squeezing my hips, squeezing my quads, and I'm going to push into the floor. Straight up. Back down. Wedging in. Back down. So if you do everything right, once you get into that position, when you wedge in, you'll hear the people say taking the slack out of the bar, wedging. It all means the same thing. You're trying to get super tight to where almost when I start bringing my hips in, that bar just kind of comes up. So this is, for me, it's light. So when I come up to it, if I start, I'm squeezing my lats, bar's nice and close. As soon as I start wedging, take a big breath. See how that bar just kind of floats? And it's a combination of, I'm squeezing my lats to get really tight, but really I'm squeezing my hips and wedging that into the bar. With sumo, all of those same conditions apply, except with sumo, you're going to have a more upright, instead of where conventional, I set up with the bar at my midfoot. With sumo, and again, I'm going to be wider. So I'll have a wider stance, which may be more comfortable for some people. I'll be a little more upright. Hips might start a little bit lower. Some people it won't. But my shins should be more upright. So I'm going to come down to the bar again. Loose arms so that I let them come straight down. Let's see, my shins are more upright. So, and I'm a little more upright than I am with conventional. So now the focus with sumo is it uses more of your hips. So I have my feet angled out. I'm going to focus on really squeezing my quads, my hips, and wedging into the bar. So I like even though you want your upper body, your back, everything to be super tight, especially if you're new, I want you to think of letting your arms relax and letting your legs do the work. So while you need to be tight, a lot of things that I'll see people who are just starting, especially, will be with the deadlift. You have this death grip and you stand up. You see how I shrugged? That's because you're focusing so much on keeping tight. Whereas if you have a nice, loose, my legs are doing all the work. Not all the work, but the majority of it, which is what they should be doing. Yeah, and so we're going to show a drill that, again, one of the most important, aside from, you know, using your legs to drive into the floor, the next most important concept that I would say is to keep that bar close to you. Do not let like I said, keeping the bar over your midfoot. So if you pull and the bar goes forward, well, then that's when your hips are going to come up. You're going to let that, you know, bar move and the lift is pretty much over. Keep it nice and tight and you're going to really keep those lats engaged and super tight. So this drill we love because it kind of helps teach that. So do you want me to pull or do you want me to, I'll do it and you pull?
Yeah, you work out. I'm getting tired. I am getting tired.
So, and this drill we can
And we'll maybe
do,
back up.
okay, yeah. We'll do this drill with partners, but you can also do it by hooking a band to a rack and stepping out. It's a good warm-up.
I always have someone to help me, so I want to know.
You can do it against, yep, you can do it against a rack, so.
All right, guys, so in the same way with the squat, how we did the partner pull, we're finding ways to generate and work against our own resistance, if that idea kind of makes sense. We showed that with the squat. We showed that a little bit like with the bench, like with that rowing or the bow and arrow idea. So again, the concentric, the actual lifting, we're not even spending that much time on. You see what I mean? We're spending so much time on the setup that the lift itself almost takes care of itself, like we said at the beginning. But this particular drill kind of splits the difference between all that because we are very much going to be lifting the weight. However, we're still the seed of the idea happens at the setup before the weight ever even moves. So Tracy talked about pulling the slack out of the bar, which is working against gravity this way. We're also going to be working against resistance this way. So we've been talking about protecting the armpit, pulling the lats down, closing this armpit angle. This is another way that we're going to train that. So Tracy's going to get into any deadlift variation that she wants. Conventional, sumo, it's all good. So she's going to come down, grab a hold of the bar. So we've got 135 pounds that she's working against this way, but I'm going to give her 135 pounds working this way. Maybe not that much. But I'm going to give her just a little pull. Does that feel okay? All right. She's going to float the bar up just an inch. She's going to hold. Now she's going to finish the lift, and I'm going to kind of move up, down nice and slow. Reset the tension, pull the slack. I'm going to give her a little resistance. Float the bar, and finish. Nice and slow back down, and relax. So, when we float the bar, she is technically lifting the whole weight. Does that make sense? Obviously, because it's off the ground. And she's resisting horizontal pull this way. The reason that we like to float the bar right off the ground is because if she feels secure, strong, nothing hurts, nothing feels out of place here, then the rest is gravy. Because where do we pull our backs? Where do things get squirrely? It's usually right off the ground. So if she can be tight, if she can maintain technical perfection, total body engagement, floating the weight right here, again, the hard work has been done. We're stress testing her position. And then from there, we finish the lift. From a training standpoint, this isn't something that you want to do too much of because you do want to train that explosive strength off the ground. But when you're getting acquainted with the deadlift for the first time, or you're really, really refining your technique, maybe after a back injury, maybe after a retooling of your technique, this is a very, very powerful drill. The hamstrings are lifting the weight. The lats are resisting the pull from your partner. Does this drill make sense? Tracy, anything to add here? Mm-mm. Cool. So a little bit of practice here. Let's grab, I pulled out some bands here. Get with your partner, light resistance. You can maybe tell your partner, give me more, give me less. Let's do that float for a second, then finish. Again, you can move up with your partner and down. Let's try 3 to 5 reps per partner. How can I screw up the deadlift? How can I do that? I'm sure I'll figure out a way. I'm sure I'll figure out a way to screw this up.
Okay, so the command for deadlift, again, you get your minute. It's really long with the deadlift because you don't really have much to do in terms of setup, unless you're me. And then that's a whole nother story. So you get, bars loaded.
Yeah.
Come up to the bar. You can go ahead, lift in your duck stance. Lift the bar, and then the ref down. That's it. So you come up to the bar, get your belt ready. You can do that on the platform. So the only command is down. The chief ref will be in front of you with a hand up and then down. So the things for deadlift, what we're looking for, you need to lock out completely. So you stand up, knees need to be locked, shoulders need to be back. So unlock your knees, unlock your shoulders. So if you're at the top of a heavy lift, try to fake it like you hop of a real heavy lift and you're kind of soft knees. I don't know, that's kind of a decent lockout. So, so yeah, and we can, with your shoulders, if it's just pulling you and you just can't, you can try to fake that out. Maybe you'll get a white light, you never know, but it needs to be locked out. That's one of the things, main things that are being looked for. You cannot drop the bar.
I will not even disrespect this house by dropping
Exactly.
this bar.
I was just going to say, when I see someone train, and again, CrossFit, because they drop the bars because they do Olympic lifting, and in Olympic lifting you drop the bars. So sometimes when I've had athletes that they lift it and then they just drop it when I first get them, it makes me cringe because of competition. So I would never drop a bar in training. If you drop the bar, even if it's accidental, red lights. I've seen people want to celebrate. And they, kind of almost drop it even just from down here and slam it down, red lights. So you need to let it down, not slow and controlled, but controlled all the way down. If you're doing a big heavy lift and let's say you're above your knees and you start to kind of let it slide up to where you ramp, and then stand up, using your legs a little bit. Ramping's not allowed. Hitching is not allowed, so hitching is, hitch, none of that movement, no downward movement at all. So if the bar's coming up, let's say you come up a little bit and then it goes down even just a little bit and comes up, red lights. Feet, you can, again, you don't want any, whoops. No movement with your feet. Your feet cannot slide, cannot move, you can't take a step. And then of course the main one, which I said with down, so someone gets excited because they just got a lift and we're sitting there down, red. So yeah, so that's it. Did I miss anything?
Whenever I lift mine yesterday, they were really particular about
Oh, and came forward.
They said my
Unlocked.
didn't come.
Right. So if you,
I was like here, but apparently
yeah,
my leg was
yep. So if you're not, and usually it's if your hips come forward, so if you lean back a lot of times, your knees will soften. So if you're back, let's say, so lock out. So that would be lock out. So lock out, and now go extend back and see, maybe not that exaggerated, but that's what happens. A lot of times for people who lock out, especially with sumo. So are you sumo? Okay. So especially with sumo, if you lock out with sumo, a lot of people want to really make sure they get those shoulders back. And if you do that too much, it will soften your knees some. So then that would be unlocked. So you want at the top, you want to make sure that those knees, both at the start of the deadlift and at the end, that those knees are locked and their shoulders are locked. And the thing that for hitching, especially with, I guess with all of them, with sumo and conventional, but the biggest thing that I will tell, which both Dania and Aaron know this as well, because I've said it to them, is patience. Is if anybody can grind out a deadlift, it's me. And I mean, I can do a 10-minute long deadlift, but I will be determined not to hitch. And so if you can just not rush it, it's often when you try to rush a heavy weight that then often you go up too fast, and then that's when you find yourself nowhere to go, so you end up hitching. If you just focus on that leg drive and patience and taking your time and just knowing, okay, I'm gonna do it, I'm just gonna keep going slow. If there's no, I mean, Erin did, I just have to say, she did, it was an amazing, I can't believe she didn't, like, her legs were like shaking.
I did have a little up down, but
it was not, it wasn't, no, it was, she was holding it and her legs, but she stayed tight and that bar just kept moving up. So that was like the epitome of patience with staying with it, so.
Well, I was mine yesterday. It went so slow, and I thought it's because it's so heavy. But halfway through mid-thigh, I was like, I got this.
Exactly. I think you get to a point with deadlift that you just kind of know, and you just have to be patient with it. And the thing, I like that you said that, because I always try to remind myself on days when I say, gosh, this feels so heavy. It is, you know, and so you just try to stay with it.
If it was light, you wouldn't be powerlifting.
Exactly. So patience is, I mean, in all of them, but especially when it comes to like hitching or ramping or anything like that, it's the patience that will end up making a big difference in that. So those are all the, yep.
Yeah.
And practice them in training. If you find yourself when weights get heavier, we'll talk about, you know, accessories, but you can have accessories to work in where your weaknesses. If it's slow off the floor, then that's what you want to work on. If it's slow, if you're hitching or there's things, and that's your lockout. So you want to do things that really train and work that lockout.
Yeah. So if you keep all of your standards and your techniques in mind, you will not deviate. It's okay to, if it's super maximal attempts, if it's just 101% of what you have that day, that's fine. There's no shame in just maintaining structural integrity and just losing the bar. Or, you know, God forbid, it slips out of your hand just because of grip strength. That happens. But hitching, rolling back, all that stuff, that's, you know, hopefully you never train that way. Hopefully that's never like an acceptable thing that you allow into your training. But listen, your body is just going to do whatever it has to do to complete the task.
Yep.
So a big part of your training, the reason we do a lot of these techniques, is to make light weights feel harder so that harder weights feel more secure. So that when you get the urge to ramp, mentally, no, stick with the midfoot balance, finish the hips, and that's where you get like this shaken. The best thing is when you see that happening, because you know that that person is grinding into 99 and 100% of their capacity, but they're not losing. You know, there's a difference between central nervous system twitching out versus like trying to jimmy the weight up your legs.
Right.
So if you just maintain position, tension, driving the hips forward, you train that way with light weights, you try to make your lighter weights feel heavier so that when you get to the heavier weights, it's not a surprise. that it feels heavy, but you know how to maintain your technique under that stress, under that load. And then you won't have, you won't have to even entertain the notion of like worrying about hitching or ramping. From here,
Yep.
we're gonna
Accessories.
briefly go over accessories,
Yep.
and then we'll be in the home stretch. How's everybody feeling? Yeah.
Yep.
It's been a long day. It's been a long weekend of lifting for a lot of you. So as we kind of wrap up here, if you have any major questions on any of the lifts, feel free. But otherwise, Tracy's going to rock and roll us through a few of the deadlift variations there. And as you can imagine, it's kind of following the same theme that we've been going over with our squats and deadlifts.
Yep.
Staying very true to the technique, but making it harder on yourself.
Yep.
That's kind of the theme behind these variations. It's the competition lift, but we're making it artificially hard.
Yep. And training and building on these different like pause variations, tempo, any of that, if you train that way a lot when, before the weights get really heavy, it's just going to make it's going to make a big difference in your technique. It's going to carry through. And it's going to make those heavier weights feel a whole lot lighter once you get back to your regular lifts. So it can be mentally challenging because you do have to lower the weights quite a bit. Usually it's a lot lighter than you expect it to be, but you'll be amazed, sometimes how fast that grows and you feel yourself getting stronger. I like pushing all these accessories as much or more than I even push, my competition stance. Obviously training them for a meet is one thing, but it's fun pushing and seeing what you can do with these. So with deadlifts, again, it's going to follow the same theme, as you can tell: pause, slow eccentric. When you do pause deadlifts, you can pause at different points. If you find yourself where your sticking point is, you want to go like a little bit below that. But you can do double pauses. You can pause low, pause, higher. Across the board, what I like to do is try to do pause right off the floor. It's harder than if I wanted to do a pause deadlift, get set up and pause here. That's going to be a little bit easier. It's not easy, but easier than right here. So paused, like a good 1 second pause, even as it gets heavier. I like slow eccentrics, tempo deadlifts as well, very much. And this is good because it gives you not just the pulling, part of it, but it really, really works on your upper back and maintaining that positioning all the way down. So slow eccentric is on the way down, not the way up. So it's nice, fast up. And then slow, like 3 to 5 count. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. And you can even do that where you do like a soft touch. Don't even reset. Go back up and you're trying to maintain that tension the whole time. Super hard. And then the third variation that is probably one of my favorites are just regular RDLs, Romanian deadlifts. The way I like to do them and train them and coach them is to not go all the way down, just to come like just below your knees, maintain that tension, pause for about a second, and then fast up. And I like to do like sets of 8 of these. So up and now. Just pushing my hips back. And growing that as it's great to see that grow that to be a heavier weight, and you feel that will work lockout very good. You're maintaining tension, and I was telling Erin this, she can do those. She competes sumo. You compete sumo. You can do those with sumo as well. Same thing. And even with sumo, bring it down, hold that, up. Bring it down, hold it up. So those are probably my 3 favorite accessories. There's many more, but those would, RDLs obviously will help with that top end strength. So eccentrics will build both, and pause off the floor will help that off the floor, maintaining that, and then speed off the floor.